Hey, I hope you guys are doing good today. We are going to be watching Sparta's Secret Police, and I have no idea what is involved in this, but it kind of caught my eye and I am intrigued. So here we are. If you do get a chance, I'd appreciate if you can leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a bunch, and I will have Invicta's video linked in my description below. So be sure to give them a like and subscribe because I kind of went through his channel as well, and it is very interesting. And so thank you for the recommendation for checking him out. All right, let's get into it. Let's go.
The Spartans are remembered today as great warriors whose reputation was built upon the fear they struck upon their enemies in battle. However, what often goes overlooked is the true source of their strength, the fear they wielded at home to dominate an enormous slave class.
Oh.
This group, known as the Helots, outnumbered them perhaps 7-1. It was this deep labor pool which truly held up Spartan society. Yet such a strength was also a fatal flaw. If the Helots turned against their masters, they risked bringing the whole system down. Therefore, Thucydides tells us that everything in Sparta was designed as a foil to the Helots, and Plato says that Sparta itself became an armed camp against them.
So they were surrounded by the Helots, like from this map. Hold on, I'm gonna go back here. So this is like what the layout was for them. So I mean, that seems like you are in quite the territory.
Yet such a strength was also a fatal flaw. If the Helots turned against their masters, they risked bringing the whole system down. Therefore, Thucydides tells us that everything in Sparta was designed as a foil to the Helots, and Plato says that Sparta itself became an armed camp against them. But perhaps one of the greatest tools of Spartan control was a mysterious institution known simply as the Krypteia.
Krypteia, okay. So that's how you say it. I saw it in the title and I was like, I don't know. But I'm not surprised. I am not surprised by this. You know, like you have like a secret society, I guess, of some sorts. I'm not shocked.
Mysterious
It's kind of cool though.
institution known simply as the Krypteia. Very little is known about its true nature, with sources leaving hints that it may have acted as a rite of passage, a secret police, a state-sponsored terrorist network.
A state-sponsored terrorist network. Yeah, that is wild. That is crazy.
A state-sponsored terrorist network, and a military reconnaissance unit. Today, we will seek to shed light on their covert operations by reconstructing the history of the Spartan Krypteia.
I'm ready.
As we'll see in today's episode, history requires a lot of nuance, but it's unfortunate that much of the way history is presented today can be botched, sensationalized, and corporatized, to the point that truth is heavily distorted. And the same thing happens with the news we consume every day. That's why it's so important to take a closer look, question the narrative, and seek out the full picture, just like we do on the channel. And this brings us to today's sponsor, Ground News. They're an app and website that allows you to become an informed consumer of the news. Unlike modern trends that aim to sensationalize and distill reality into propaganda-like soundbites, Ground News does the opposite. Their mission is to give you the tools to think critically, consider nuance, identify bias, and think for yourself. And you can check them out in the link below at ground.news/Invicta. As a practical example, we can take a look at the recent story that something may have been found under the Great Pyramids of Giza.
I remember
Through Ground
story.
News, I can see that the bias and distribution of sources is right-leaning, and I can see that overall the factuality of potential articles are only at 33% high factuality, which means that a majority of them are low factuality. If I were to pick a random article, then that means I would probably be stepping on a landmine. Now, in terms of picking the right article that I might want to choose to look at in greater depth, you can actually see that they're going to be sorted by left, center, and right. On the left, for instance, I might be able to say that, hey, this one has high factuality, and they're providing some fact checking, versus if I go to the right, this one is low factuality. I can see that InfoWars is taking this at its face value. It's a free energy truth bomb, And if I wanted to get something a bit more nuanced, I can go to the center and I can actually do filters here for high or even mixed factuality if I wanted to, and see how that all shakes out. So as you can see with this example, ground news gives you a great 360-degree perspective on stories to understand different perspectives and their potential biases. But they actually have a lot of other perks. For instance, my favorite feature is the blind spot feed. It helps you stay aware of what's going on outside your usual sources, and it's a great way to ensure that you're never blindsided by information you didn't even know you were missing. I honestly love ground news and think they've created one of the most powerful and easy to use tools to survive in our age of misinformation. So if you want to maintain a healthy media diet, head to ground.news/Invicta or scan the QR code on screen to transform how you read the news. That's ground.news/Invicta. Without a doubt, ground news has become one of the greatest upgrades to my online life, and I really recommend that you check it out.
Before we begin, it will be important to make a couple of disclaimers. The first is that our sources regarding the Krypteia are extremely limited. This is the extent of what records survive.
Oh my gosh, this is it? Oh, yeah, man, this is like nothing. This is, so I wonder how much speculation, or I guess, like maybe based on things that have happened throughout history for them, that they could maybe link it back to this. But yeah, this is not a whole lot to work with.
It includes writings from Plato, Plutarch, and Aristotle, as cited by Plutarch, as well as a possible uncontextualized scrap of papyrus. Beyond this, everything else will rely on inference and informed speculation.
That's fair.
A second point is that our discussions must be placed in proper temporal context. When speaking of Sparta, we must remember that its society went through various historical phases. Theirs was not a monolithic culture, and one runs the risk of constructing a pseudo-history out of amalgamated sources from different eras. For instance, many of the more extreme Spartan practices which circulate in pop culture today can be traced back not to the years of Sparta's prime in the 5th century BC, but to the 1st century AD, when its relevance had dwindled to that of a caricatured tourist destination of the Roman Empire.
I feel like that's kind of important too. Like I wonder like how many people actually know that. People that don't actually like look into this kind of history, like do they think that this, like when you see like your pop culture Roman, esque performative type stuff. I wonder how many people thought that was like peak like Roman times, because I would say that I kind of feel like I was probably more somewhere of the unknown, where it was like, I know the references and I've seen it and I see, like a lot of Roman based things. But if I were to try to pinpoint like where in their timeline, I would probably just say like I'm not really sure. But I feel like there's definitely some people that would be like, oh yeah, like this was like peak Roman era, So that's actually like a really important kind of like context to add to this.
Tourist destination of the Roman Empire. A third and final point to make is that even if we do temporarily locate our sources, they can't always be taken at face value. They come from the viewpoint of outsiders who relay information with imperfect knowledge and in ways that might be embellished for the sake of propaganda or philosophical argumentation.
That is also a really good point. Yep. Yep. I did watch a video on like in my free time about like some Roman Greek and some other things about propaganda and psychology and stuff. And I feel like that was something that was a perspective that I didn't always like. I don't think I ever really thought about, but makes a lot of sense. But then I feel like too, when you're trying to like maybe figure some things out or dig a little deeper, I could see where some of the propaganda made the waters a little bit muddy as far as trying to be as factual as possible. So I actually love these two little contexts that are put in here.
Embellished for the sake of propaganda or philosophical argumentation. Getting at the truth, therefore, relies on cross-referencing with other sources
Yeah,
and archaeological records. All of this is something that academics have long been wrestling with. Studies from recent decades have done much to help reframe our understanding of the past, but it takes a while for this information to percolate through to public-facing media. Even when it does, everything should still be taken with a grain of salt.
true. I agree.
With these disclaimers in mind, let us proceed. The origins of the Krypteia.
It's kind of crazy how some of this stuff is, it's like some things never change, right? I mean, like, I feel like, all of this still goes on, like all, of all of these kind of crazy things that get said and kind of slung around, and and this is how long ago, and I feel like we are still doing it today.
Let us proceed. The origins of the Krypteia is shrouded in mystery, an appropriate fact considering the name. All of our information about it comes from a small handful of sources, none of which agree completely. Aristotle postulates that the institution began under Lycurgus, the legendary 8th century law-giving king of Sparta. Plutarch, on the other hand, believed that it was created later after the earthquake of 464 BC in response to a Helot uprising. Unfortunately, due to sparse record-keeping and scant archaeological evidence, it's frankly impossible to say which is correct.
Mm,
Thus, we will endeavour today to consider both options while reading between the lines as much as possible to provide context.
that's fair.
If we go with the earlier reckoning of Aristotle, then the Krypteia would have emerged in the Archaic period. It's an unfortunate era to pick, as we know even less about its murky history. Presumably, the early Spartans and their neighbours of the 8th to 7th centuries BC fought small-scale battles over arable land, grazing rights, and control of sacred places. In this context, we can pull in a relevant description from Plato. Quote, "The Krypteia affords a wonderfully severe training in hardihood. As the men go barefoot in winter and sleep without coverlets and have no attendants, but wait on themselves and rove through the whole countryside both by night and day."
That seems
Given that Plato
wild.
seems to describe the Krypteia as a sort of exposure or endurance trial for youths, it seems plausible to imagine that such an institution could have arisen in early Spartan history out of the era's need to toughen up young men for raids or battles.
So were these maybe chosen as young, like really young boys, and then kind of molded into, these kind of crazy, good, tough type of soldiers? Or what are small military?
Out of the era's need to toughen up young men for raids or battles. Though, again, we should note that this is highly speculative.
Right.
So, if this was not the
I mean, like that would make sense if you wanted to have some secret policing, military, whatever. You would want to try to mold some younger ones, so that you can kind of make them into whatever you want, essentially. And so if you did get them, I don't know. I mean, like maybe when they're 8 to 10 years old. I mean, you could probably have quite the outcome with them, if you're doing all these crazy, like endurance type things for them.
that this is highly speculative. So, if this was not the definitive origin of the Krypteia, then let us seek another plausible date. For this, we must fast forward another century or so. By now, Sparta had slowly extended its grip over the southern Peloponnese. Understandably, such expansion would have brought with it many growing pains. Indeed, it's in this time of the 6th century BC that scholars now date many of their key social reforms, namely property-based citizenship, shared education, and the institution of mess groups or syssitia.
Okay.
Given all this, it would be convenient to simply lump in the establishment of the Krypteia.
I mean, he is kind of right though. Like that would seem like a kind of like a natural like creation, right? Because like I mean, look at all the stuff that goes on in their social reforms. It wouldn't be surprising to see something like this kind of emerge from that.
Would be convenient to simply lump in the establishment of the Krypteia, as Aristotle seems to have done with the mythical reforms of Lycurgus.
Right.
But to understand why this might be the case, we must address one of the greatest emerging challenges facing Sparta: the question of the helots. A discussion of helots is actually quite a complex topic. There's a lot of confusion amongst our sources, and modern scholarship is still wrestling over the finer details. In broad strokes, though, it is generally accepted that the helots were a non-citizen hereditary caste, stripped of all rights and tied in service to plots of land or kleros. Those who fell into this class did so at the point of a spear, having
Oh.
neither been assimilated nor exterminated when the oppressors came knocking.
Oh my God, this sounds crazy though. This sounds crazy. I can imagine like a lot of things could happen because of this. Holy.
Been assimilated nor exterminated when the oppressors came knocking. This appears to have occurred in two major waves. First, as the early Spartans overpowered the native population of Laconia, and second, when they invaded Messenia in a series of wars. We should, however, note that not all faced this fate. The Perioiki within Spartan lands, for instance, were non-citizens with limited rights. The Skiratai
Okay.
were a semi-independent allied community to the north, and the members of the Peloponnesian League were only controlled on a geopolitical level. Nonetheless, the amount of individuals subjected to this system of helatry was vast. No hard numbers exist besides a suggestion by Herodotus that Sparta mobilized 7 helots for each 1 Spartan to fight the Battle of Plataea. Applying this ratio to citizen numbers from the later Peloponnesian War, we get a count of 8,000 Spartiates and 56,000 helots.
I mean, even if this is like an estimate, that's a lot. I mean, this is like quite the ratio. I mean, you got 56,000 helots to 8,000 Spartans. I mean, that seems like that is quite the battle to have. I mean, what? That's like 7 helots to every 1 Spartan, right? Like that. Probably something like that. I mean, I mean, that seems like you could have some problems from this, for sure.
But these were just the mobilized men,
Mm.
roughly doubling the count for women, children, and elderly.
Oh,
We can easily get a total population of over 100,000 helots, if not more. Troublingly, this ratio only got worse for the Spartans over time as their citizen numbers dwindled.
I would imagine. I mean, 8,000 to like. I mean, what? Okay, now we're looking at 156,000. Yeah, I would say that you could probably have some challenges.
We'll get back to the security implications of this in a moment. For now, we should compare this practice of helatry to the broader practice of slavery in the Greek world. In terms of similarities, both involved men, women, and children.
Okay.
Both were treated as chattel property, whose status was inherited from mother to child. Both were associated with a dehumanizing attire of dog-skin caps and rough animal skins. Both lacked all rights and legal protection. Both were subject to severe punishment and violence, mental, physical, and sexual.
Oh my gosh.
In terms of differences, slaves were gained mostly through trade and conquest, while helots were primarily a self-reproducing population. Slaves came from all manner of nationalities, while helots tended to share a more common heritage and identity.
Oh, okay.
Beyond
Okay.
this, many minor differences could occur on
I mean, like this. I almost kind of feel like we are splitting hairs and still coming to the same conclusion. Like helots weren't that far off from slaves, but as far as like their similarities, I mean, like these are like some big similarities to have, right? It's just like a matter of how each one got there, but your end game is very very similar. Damn.
account of each city-state's unique practices and traditions. For example, Pseudo-Xenophon comments that the Athenians were too soft on their slaves by comparing them to the Spartans, stating,
Oh.
quote, "In Sparta, my slave would fear you." Further authors point out the harsh conditions of helots. Details of the particulars only emerge from later sources, who write of annual mandatory whippings and killings if they grew too strong.
Wait, so would they just do that randomly just to keep like the fear instilled in them? Just like, oh, like you never know when it was gonna happen, and then, you're one minute you're out doing your job, and then the next year this is going on, or they're putting you in the dirt. I mean that would be a very powerful way to, I guess, keep that leash short for some.
Once more, we might question the reality of such claims. Nonetheless, there is at least a strong perception of Spartan harshness in our sources. But why was this the case? Again, an answer would depend on how closely we align perceptions with reality. Going by ancient authors, though, this largely boils down to the threat of revolt.
Yeah.
Specifically, they draw attention to the large number and shared group identity of the helots as being susceptible to mass uprising. Therefore,
I mean, those are both very valid points. Like, to try to instill fear would probably maybe, at least for a while, or for the most part, probably keep you revolting down. Because you'd probably have enough people that are probably too scared to want to revolt if the sentence is death, or, getting whipped to almost death. I would say that would probably deter a lot of people. Not all, obviously, but I would say you would probably have a stronger hold on it, through fear inducing and fear mongering, and doing like some uh pretty crazy things to to those people, because they do share identity, but then there's so many of them too, right? So like, you're like, I don't know how much they knew, if how much they outnumbered the Spartans. I mean, that I don't know if he'll say that, but like, I mean, was that like a realization that a lot of them had, that like so like, I guess the more scary you are, maybe that would help you keep your numbers under control better, because I would say that like, if they ever got organized sooner, I think they could have overtaken Sparta.
of the helots as being susceptible to mass uprising. Therefore, Thucydides tells us that everything in Sparta was designed as a foil to the helots,
Yeah.
and Plato says that Sparta itself became an armed camp against the helots.
I think that sounds pretty accurate, especially if, from the little information that we do know as far as numbers go. I mean, even if it was smaller, but the ratio is still the same, I mean, that's still like a pretty big thing for the Spartans, because they are extremely outnumbered.
Again, there is much debate as to just how true this was. But regardless of the degree of skepticism we apply, the security risk was undeniably there.
Oh, yeah.
Such concerns came to a head in 464 BC, when a massive earthquake struck the southern
Oh.
Peloponnese. This destroyed many buildings and had a reported death toll of 20,000. In the chaos which
Oh, 20,000? That's big. I feel like that's pretty big.
and had a reported death toll of 20,000. In the chaos which followed, the Helots revolted. Sparta was unable to handle the situation on its own
Yeah,
and
I
was
bet.
forced to call upon the aid of other city-states for help. Eventually, the uprising was put down, but the event seemed to have shaken Sparta to its core. Not only were they now keenly aware of the danger of revolt, but so too were the other city-states across Greece.
Mm.
Indeed, future conflicts would see rivals attempt to undermine Sparta by way of the Helot population.
Yo, that is kind of genius though, especially if you uh wanted to take them over and you could win over the Helots. Do you know what? That's not a bad maneuver.
Rivals attempt to undermine Sparta by way of the Helot population. Something had to be done. This now finally brings us back to the Krypteia.
I'm gonna be honest though, I thought, like I don't know a ton about Roman history. I mean, like I know like basic stuff from the little tidbits that I can remember from school, but I would say that like in my head I always thought Sparta was huge. Like it was like this, enormous city that was, like all powerful and kind of crazy, and but like I'm totally wrong. I'm so wrong by this. So this video is great because I honestly had no clue about, all of this going on like to this extent and with these kind of numbers.
Had to be done. This now finally brings us back to the Krypteia. Its founding, as Plutarch suggests, being introduced shortly after the earthquake revolt as a remedy to the Helot problem. Now, with all this context in mind, let's delve into how it actually functioned. Interestingly, one of the most detailed notes about the Krypteia relates to their recruitment. Plato makes this one quite clear, and we can cite him directly. Quote, "A young man would be sent out of the city with orders to avoid detection for a certain length of time. He was therefore forced to live wandering the mountains, sleeping with one eye open so as not to be caught, and without being able to use slaves or carry provisions. This was also a form of training for war, since each young man was sent out naked, having been ordered to spend an entire year wandering outside the city."
You get kicked out naked and then you go wander around for a year, and oh my, this sounds intense. This sounds intense. I wonder what the success rate was.
Having been ordered to spend an entire year wandering outside the city, up in the mountains, and to keep himself alive by stealing and other shifts of that kind. And to do it in such a way as to avoid being seen by anybody. This is why it was called the Krypteia, because those who had been seen, wherever that might occur, would be punished. As the passage implies, recruits were young men, apparently selected for their intelligence or cunning. Upon being assigned or appointed to the Krypteia, they were thrown into the countryside with orders to survive for a defined period of time, estimated to be 1 or 2 years.
1 or 2 years? Oh my gosh. I mean, like I mean, this is kind of crazy. So like, are they just throwing them out there and hoping for the best? So like when they come back, they're going to be like hardened survivalists that learned on their own because like did they? I mean, like was there any other training before getting thrown to the wolves? Because that's crazy. That seems like insane. And how many of them were successful? How many died? And then like how many, I guess, did actually like legitimately got recruited? Because this seems wild.
Or appointed to the Krypteia, they were thrown into the countryside with orders to survive for a defined period of time, estimated to be 1 or 2 years. That
Gosh.
survival was the experience that would shape them. In
Mhm.
essence, they would fight for their lives against the hostile environment, using whatever tools were at their disposal. To this end, we can now discuss their gear. According to our sources, they were lightly equipped, with only the tunic on their backs. They were given the right to hold a small weapon, but nothing more than a dagger, knife, or perhaps a small sickle.
I feel like that seems pretty good because I don't think you want anything that's gonna be too loud or too heavy. You want a weapon that's probably pretty accessible, not too heavy, not too big. Because like if you gotta like be a nomad essentially, like going everywhere and you are not trying to get caught, the last thing you want to do is be heavy and have like some huge weapon. So well, I mean this seems pretty stealthy. And you could probably maybe like blend in a little better too.
Thus armed, they were sent out with no more than the rations they could fit into a small satchel,
Oof.
perhaps enough for 1 or 2 days at the most, and were not allowed to bring any sort of servant or camping gear. In short, they were forced into an extreme survival situation.
Yo, we should do this now. Like, I don't know if you guys ever watched Alone, but we should I would totally watch a version of this like in like to today's standards.
Whatever this time in the wilderness brought to them, they were forbidden from heavy weapons or equipment. They would maintain themselves by force of will and cunning. At this point, we might ask, what did all this running around in the wilderness have to do with solving the Helot problem? To answer this, let's now talk about their operations. Here, Plutarch provides us with one of the most infamous descriptions of the Krypteia. Quote, "Its character was as follows. Periodically, the overseers of the young men would dispatch into the countryside in different directions the ones who appeared to be particularly intelligent. By day,
Okay.
they would disperse to obscure parts in order to hide and rest. At night, they made their way to roads and murdered any helot whom they caught.
Oh.
Frequently, too, they made their way through the fields, killing the helots who stood out for their physique and strength. Aristotle makes the further notable point that immediately upon taking office, the Ephors would declare war on the helots. So,
Yo, do you think like the Helots thought there was like a serial killer amongst them? I mean, like, cause that is kind of wild. Like you're off in all of these Helots, right? But like, but nobody knows. Nobody knows you're out there. So, or do you think they became like some urban legend and then, or some like spooky story of some sort because nobody had figured it out yet?
upon taking office, the Ephors would declare war on the helots, so that they could be killed without pollution.
Ooh.
With this, a picture begins to emerge of a shadowy policing force that used terror to keep the slave population in check.
Mm-hmm.
It remains unclear, though, whether they targeted hotspots of resentment and potential uprisings, or just stole and murdered whatever they encountered. Some evidence of more deliberate cullings is recorded by Thucydides in his History of the Peloponnesian War. Quote, "The Helots were invited by a proclamation to pick out those of their number who claimed to have most distinguished themselves against the enemy, in order that they might receive their freedom, the object being to test them, as it was thought
Oh.
that the first to claim their freedom would be the most high-spirited and the most apt to rebel. As many as 2,000 were selected accordingly, who crowned themselves and went round the temples rejoicing in their new freedom. The Spartans, however, soon afterwards did away with them."
Oh my God, that is dirty. That is, oh man, that is, that is dirty. Like shrouding it like this. I mean, I get it. I absolutely get it. And when you are outnumbered to such an extent, you are gonna do some crazy stuff. But man, oh man. I mean, I'm actually kind of impressed by that though.
The Spartans, however, soon afterwards did away with them, and no one ever knew how each of them perished.
I bet they don't.
Though the Krypteia are not mentioned here, we might speculate that they helped source the information about whom to target and may have helped in making them disappear. In this way, did the institution work in the shadows to maintain Sparta's internal security over the years. Doing so, however, must have become increasingly difficult. Though Sparta did ultimately win the Peloponnesian War, it devastated their citizen population.
Yeah, I bet it did. I am kind of curious though that like if this, Krypteia was really doing this and this is like how everything operated. It's impressive that we know so little because I mean I guess maybe they did a good enough job to hide everything. I don't know. I honestly don't know because if it is that, then that is very impressive.
Thus crippled, the city's tenuous
Terrifying.
grasp at hegemony
Impressive.
lasted only 10 years before being brought down by other rising powers, such as Thebes. In 371 BC, the Spartan field army was decisively defeated at Leuctra, allowing the victorious general Epaminondas to march upon the Peloponnese. The invasion prompted the Helots to revolt en masse. To make matters worse for their former overlords, Epaminondas set about building 3 new fortified cities to serve as
Ooh.
bastions for the freed slaves and a check
Oh.
against future Laconian aggression.
Oh man, that's gonna hurt. That's definitely gonna hurt.
This move so threatened the Spartans that they soon rallied
Yeah.
forces to launch whatever they could against the nascent city of Messene. Here we can imagine that the Krypteia would have been involved to strike back against the Helots. In the end, though, the oppressors failed to re-enslave the Messenians. Thus, their aim of returning to the old status quo was foiled, and Sparta now slumped further into decline. As it did, the institution of the Krypteia would also fade. However, before disappearing, our sources leave us with one last enigmatic mention of its activities some 150 years later.
Oh.
By now, Greece had been conquered by the Macedonians, had lived through the tumultuous wars of the Diadochi, and was now back to its own fractious quarrelling as the powers of Rome and the Seleucids encroached from both flanks. Around 220 BC, the Spartan king Cleomenes came into conflict with the Macedonians during one of the region's regular flare-ups. It is here that Plutarch reintroduces us to the Krypteia in an entire new context. Quote, "He showed himself an admirable general in the hour of peril, but he was overwhelmed by the superior character of his enemy's armor and the weight of their heavy-armed phalanx. For Antigonus ordered his Illyrians and Acarnanians to go round by a secret way and envelop the other wing, and then led out the rest of his forces to battle. And when Cleomenes, from his post of observation, could nowhere see the arms of the Illyrians and Acarnanians, he was afraid that Antigonus was using them for such purpose. He therefore called Demoteles, the commander of the Krypteia, and ordered him to observe and find out how matters stood in the rear and on the flanks of his array."
Oh, okay. So like this is where like the recon came in too. Because I mean, that would also make sense too, because they're supposed to live their lives and be undetected. That would be a great tool for them to use for recon.
Thus we see that all of a sudden, the Krypteia now appears
Yeah.
to be functioning as a sort of organized scouting force.
Which I guess isn't to say that like that's not what they were used for regularly, right? Like just because we don't we don't hear about it, doesn't mean that they weren't still being used, because clearly, like, they show back up, what he said, like 150 years later. So clearly it must have been doing something. It was just very like hush hush.
Now appears to be functioning as a sort of organized scouting force. However, no further context is given, and it remains unclear how this new institution relates to the prior helot hunting organization we previously described.
So this is so crazy though. This is so crazy that this is so mysterious. I actually really like this though. This is actually pretty cool.
As far as we can tell, the old Krypteia of the wilderness do not seem to have had an explicit structure beyond survive a year.
Right.
That being said, they may have represented an elite recruitment pool from which the Spartans could hand-select scouts familiar with the harshness of survival, who could be used to provide intelligence to a general in need. In an era when most Greek hoplite warfare seemed to have a relatively low reliance on forward scouts, such an advantage could prove to be potentially decisive.
I mean, this would be quite the advantage that you would have. If you could have a recon team that was this good, you would have such a huge advantage against your enemy. So if that's what they were doing when, like, or like, I guess they could be like, could they have done both? You know, could they have a group that were kind of, I guess dealing with helots, but then could you have like a dedicated group to doing like recon type stuff like this? Because I feel like if you had both going simultaneously, I mean, obviously you have one because you feel like you have kind of an issue because you're outnumbered so much. But then if you were able to do like this kind of, kind of top tier reconnaissance, and like, I mean, that would give you like a pretty good leg up.
All that being said, the quote is quite vague and could be completely unrelated. After all, Krypteia may simply be translated to the stealthy men. And so what we have here could just be a coincidence without correlation.
Yeah, that is true too. I kind of like that though. The stealthy men.
So what we have here could just be a coincidence without correlation. But in whatever form it existed, the Krypteia seems to have diminished over time, with the practice certainly ceasing during or slightly before the era of Roman domination in the 2nd century BC. While the Romans delighted in Spartan traditional practices, essentially using the city as a theme park for manliness, the use of the Krypteia specifically as men who were abandoned to the wilderness, potentially regressing into banditry to survive, is never mentioned again.
Why wasn't it ever mentioned again? Yo, that's crazy. That is kind of crazy that like all of a sudden they just disappeared and then nothing else is ever documented. That is crazy.
Regressing into banditry to survive is never mentioned again. We hope you've appreciated this look into the fascinating topic of the Krypteia and the window it affords us into the broader discussion of helotry and Spartan internal security. You can catch script previews and download HD versions of our art by joining our Patreon or YouTube memberships. A big thanks to the current supporters and a big shout out to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these related videos.
I gotta say, this was a good one too. This was great. This one was really interesting and probably leaves you with so many questions and maybe like so many like speculations that you could possibly have. But at the same time, it is kind of fascinating and it is kind of interesting to see like where they could have emerged from, and because it's almost like they kind of fit into both assumptions and interpretations of it. And I mean, the fact that you have just like a handful of things to go off of, like, that is crazy. But this was great. I absolutely love this video. They did a great job. Everything about it was good. Very insightful. and just really, really interesting. I absolutely love this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you guys being here. Be sure to go and like and subscribe to Invicta because this channel is amazing. I absolutely just love this. I will definitely watch more. I will bounce around to probably a few different channels just to kind of, you know, have a little bit of a variety for myself. But this one was great. Love it. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you guys had a great day, and I will see you in the next one.